Chad, can we recognize Jaime FlorCruz? Jaime was in Beijing when I was there, going back to 1981, 82. So Jaime has a 40 years involvement with China. If you can, I'd like to ask you, what do you think about, briefly, what do you think about what we've been saying tonight? And do you have, might you have a question for Tiff?
Yeah, well, I've been away from the field since November. I'm stranded in Manila this past several months, so I'm kind of out of touch, as you know. China remains a very complex place to figure out. My question for Tiff is, what is driving the recent expulsion of U.S. reporters? Is it just anti-Americans? What about the other reporters who are doing just as tough, asking questions and writing tough reports? What does this bode for coverage of China if more and more reporters are driven out?
Okay, well, good question, and great to see you, Jaime, virtually.
Congratulations.
Last time was in Beijing. So I mean, the proximate cause, of course, and what the Chinese officials will say was their motivation was the U.S. Limits on, basically declaring, what was it, Xinhua, China Daily, People's Daily, maybe one other as state agents, and limiting the number of Chinese journalists that could be in the U.S. So that happened first. But I do think that China didn't have to respond in this way. I think it's a very dramatic gesture, as you know better than me. They've never done that before. They've even rarely kicked people out. Usually they would wait till your visa has to be renewed, right? And then just say, oh, we can't renew your visa. So, but they have expelled some people, obviously, and including maybe at least one person on this. But in any case, I think it's a very, very alarming sort of step up in the tensions and the problems between the two countries. As some other people pointed out, it's sort of one step below expelling diplomats. The Chinese certainly see, unfortunately for us, when we were there, often see us as sort of quasi-state actors and treat us in that way. So I think to actually choose those three media organizations, of which I have many friends who are affected by this, who were doing, remarkably good coverage, including, of course, of COVID-19. I think it's a big gesture, and it's sort of a shot back to say, bring it on. We're ready to make this relationship much, you do one thing, we're ready to react much more strongly. And I think it has it's part and parcel of what we were discussing earlier about this entirely new wolf warrior attitude with the diplomats and so on, which is not something that you can tell me if you disagree, Jaime, but I never saw it to this, anything like this in my years there. You were there long enough, maybe you've seen something like this before.
No, this is new. This is all brand new in terms of the wolf warriors. So you think, Tiff, that the expulsion of these journalists could be connected to the coronavirus, that Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal are precisely the organizations that have the best trained people, the biggest budgets, the longest depths of experience, the biggest platforms, that if you get rid of them, then the chances for the real truth of what's happening with the coronavirus in China, the chances that gets out are diminished. Do you think that there could have been, a dual strategy? Yes, we want to retaliate against the Trump administration, but secondly, we want to diminish the ability of the American media to get to the bottom of what's going on.
Yeah, I think without question, it's a blow to informed, coverage from China right now, to get rid of those three organizations who've had such skilled reporters there in China. So I think in part they do that. It's also sort of a warning signal to other journalists who hopefully don't react by, I don't think in most cases, the foreign journalists I knew certainly wouldn't self-censorship in response, but that is a warning. We're willing to not just throw out individual journalists, we'll throw out whole media organizations. I also think, sadly, it can be sort of unifying for at least urban Chinese. First of all, as I said, the U.S. took the first step here. China responds in this way. I think a lot of people in Chinese cities say, yeah, at least when things, at least when infections have come down and COVID-19 looks under control, they'll say, yeah, those foreign reporters are not friendly to our country. They're out there to undermine, our rise. And these are sort of narratives that the Chinese leadership is constantly putting out, including in their media. And unfortunately, I think they're often picked up by urban Chinese. I have friends and relatives in China, and there's a pretty real anti-foreign sort of wave or sentiment now in many parts of China. And I would say that foreign journalists are probably right at the height of it. I mean, it's very easy to sort of label them as unfriendly to China.